Welcome everybody to the lightning talk session for Human Dimensions to Biodiversity Science. My name is Sarah DeWalt. I am professor and chair of the Department of Biological Sciences at Clemson University. And I'm also the past president of the Association for Tropical Biology and Conservation. It's my pleasure today to moderate this lightning session. As a reminder, we're going to be having all of the speakers or all of the talks one after another. If you have questions for the speakers, please put them into the Q&A or into the chat, either one. And at the end of all of the talks, I'll ask the questions of our speakers and we can hopefully have a nice discussion. Thank you in advance, in case I forget, to Javi, who is our technician today and is going to be making sure that everything runs on time. All right, so we are going to be hearing from a series of folks today. First, we're going to have Maisa Matuoka from the University of Stirling, and then we have Matthew Pierre from the University of Fianarantsoa in Madagascar. Then we have Lucia Fitz from the University of Minnesota, Siri Abohudi, Matthew Hallett from the University of Florida, Patricia Carignano Torres from the Universidade de Sao Paulo, Arjun Kamdar from the National Center for Biological Sciences in India. Wow. So I'm really excited to hear everyone. And at this point, we're all going to mute and to turn off our videos, and we'll see you at the end of the session.
Hello everyone, my name is Maisa and I'm here to talk about the research my colleagues and I are conducting. It's called Environmental, Social and Economic Dimensions of Dam Development in Brazil, a review. So, dams can provide a variety of benefits including water supply, waste disposal and hydropower generation. But at the same time, dams can cause negative impacts too, whether by causing changes in the environment and affecting biodiversity, or by influencing the livelihood of local people and even permanently displacing them from their homes. Brazil has around 1370 hydroelectric dams in operation, responsible for approximately 62% of electricity generation, with a growing number of dams being constructed to attend the energy requirements of the population. And although numerous studies on the impact of dams have been conducted, most tend to focus on single aspects, such as ecological or social impacts, making it challenging to understand how multiple impacts may synergize. Therefore, our goal was to evaluate the ecological, social, and economic implications of dams in Brazil. And through a quantitative review, we synthesize current knowledge and highlight where further research is needed. We expect the studies to focus on large hydroelectric dams, to be concentrated in the Amazon region, and to center on ecological impacts, and that the magnitude of impacts would increase with dam size. For this, we performed a peer-reviewed literature search in English and Portuguese on Google Scholar with a combination of keywords, as shown on the gray frame. And after assessing the results from the searches, we compiled a dataset of 145 studies. But as some of them assessed multiple dams, we ended up with 180 investigations across 68 dams of different types, as you can see in the map. Our preliminary results show that hydroelectric dams are the most evaluated type, with a focus on large dams, with more than 30 megawatts of installed capacity. And almost 43% of investigations covering 20 dams originate from the Amazon region. Also, across all 145 studies, the majority, 42%, focus on ecological effects, the biodiversity alterations. 20% focused on multiple themes, when studies included, for example, ecological and social aspects together, followed by followed by environmental effects, mitigation measures, health, social, and economic effects, as indicated by the number and percentage of studies. So, based on our results, we emphasize that future research should be focused on socioeconomic and health impacts, as well as on the effects of small dams, so we can better understand the possible connections and synergies between different impacts of dams. Additionally, more information is needed from other regions of socio-ecological importance, such as the Cerrado, a biome under increasing pressure from dam expansion. In conclusion, here we've indicated underestimated aspects that are essential to achieve a complete overview of dam development in Brazil. And only by accounting for and better understanding all aspects and their interactions will it be possible to effectively predict, manage, and mitigate dam effects. And as we continue this study, we aim to assign an overall response direction for each study and also extract quantitative data from a subset of studies, so we can perform further analysis and better understand the trade-offs between dam development, people, and the environment. Finally, I'd like to thank my colleagues Maíra, Bel, and Izzy, the other participants of the research, and also acknowledge the institutions involved in this project: Universidade Estadual de Santa Cruz, Instituto de Desenvolvimento Sustentável Mamirauá, University of Stirling, Global Challenges Research Fund, and UK Research and Innovation. Here is also my contact. Thank you all for listening and for your interest in my talk. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a great pleasure for us, member of the MATI project, who had working in the southeast part of Madagascar, to present you today the results of our research titled Building a Participatory Socio-Ecological Model to Understand Natural Resources Management around Ranomafana National Park in Madagascar. First, we can say that conservation was traditionally attached to the biodiversity sciences, which are relying on the ecological system, though it is seen all around the world that the coexistence of protected areas around dwelling places has always been a big problem for both camps. That is why we have deemed necessary to understand the complexities of the use of natural resources in Ranomafana National Park, a protected area and a UNESCO World Heritage Site located in the southeast of Madagascar.
Our objective was to follow participatory RT methodology created by Etienne and colleagues to construct a qualitative model of the socio-ecological issues around Ranomafana National Park, and which method we used. This was done in 11 workshops with local communities from 2 distinct villages around the park and belong to different ethnic groups and also the other stakeholders of conservation like NGOs, associations. We built the model in 3 consecutive phases. First, identification of the problem. The first research question arises: what is the most important problem related to natural resource use? The main problem identified was land doesn't produce enough to provide for the family. Once we had identified the problem, the next step was creation of the model and validation. The second research question was: what are the actors, resource, driver, and interaction that affect the problem?
The picture we see here is a result of model representing the actor in blue frame and the resources in yellow, and the interaction between them showing by the arrows and also the drivers. We have in the picture here all the elements to answer the research question. The model analyzed actors at different scales. At the global scale, actors from the founders, the NGO, at the national, including the state as official authority to provide technical and material assistance to local community about cultivation that has impact to the food production, NGO, and finally the local representing by the local community. The local community in the model mentioned the importance of state as setting and enforcing the law about the theft of cattle. The cattle that is used as fertilizer and plowing the rice cultivation and that impacted the production. Some challenges faced during the model preparation is the contrast between the two local community living on the park. The difference between the culture, socio-economic life for the two local community impacted the model itself, but with the participatory approach and also by integrating the voice of the other actors, the difference became a force to make perfect the model. When the final model was presented on the last workshop, local community could express their recommendation to NGO and state representatives, like in what kind of project the fund should be invested and their wishes to be consulted about the future project. The model could be used as method to help conservation NGO target funding and the guideline for the state to conduct the conservation policy. The result of method used led us to confirm that the model was able to capture more holistic understanding about the natural resource management around the protected area.
Hello everyone, my name is Lucia Fitz, and today I'll be talking about: is timber management a realistic conservation alternative for indigenous Amazonian communities? Indigenous communities have an invaluable role in forest management and can be important allies in conservation efforts and reduction of deforestation. They are often economically, socially, and culturally dependent on forests. Often, they do not possess the infrastructure and equipment necessary to conduct commercially viable timber harvesting. Due to the high costs, indigenous communities partner with external institutions to harvest timber, often resulting in forest degradation within their territories, internal and external conflicts, and disinterest in starting new timber management projects. This study develops and tests a method to better evaluate community forest management according to global and locally appropriate standards in order to better inform investments and priorities for future conservation projects. Our objectives were to describe the process of timber harvest, to analyze gender differences in local perception of timber management, and to evaluate the outcomes of the timber activity, applying socioeconomic criteria and indicators. We conducted research in the Sinchi Roca native community in Peru. This native community is supported by an NGO and has a contract with a timber harvesting company in one of the departments with the greatest deforestation rates in Peru. Sinchi Roca practices community forest management on its communally owned land through the harvest of both timber and non-timber forest products for both subsistence and commercial purposes. To evaluate the sustainability of community forest management, one common method is the use of principles, criteria, and indicators. This method helps assess changes in social, economic, and ecological variables in an objective way. Data collection procedures included 5 in-depth interviews with key informants, 2 focus group discussions, and 80 intra-household surveys. Data analysis procedures included descriptive statistics, Fisher-exact tests, and multiple correspondence analysis. We found that locals partnered with a company for timber harvesting, which led to a sanction from the Peruvian government. Timber harvesting was negatively perceived in the community, with an 83.75% of survey respondents dissatisfied with the activity and 88.75% reporting internal and external conflicts due to the presence of the company. Moreover, women did not have a major role in timber harvesting, nor did they actively participate in planning meetings. The main reason for satisfaction was the creation of jobs and construction material, while the main reason for dissatisfaction was the lack of profits for the community, the debt generated with the company, and impoverished forests. This activity is usually done at a small scale for subsistence purposes, as well as in collaboration with a company for commercial purposes which has the necessary harvesting equipment that the community does not. In Sinchirroca 1, 30 species are harvested for subsistence purposes. For commercial purposes, the community had a contract with a timber company that agreed on a 30% versus 70% of the income distribution for the community and the company respectively. These collaborations often do not represent an equitable or sustainable distribution of benefits as evidenced in this study by the community's indebtedness to the company, social conflicts, and the loss of their forest management permit due to breaches found during government inspections. As we learned in this study, timber management is not always a realistic conservation alternative for small Amazonian communities. Community forest management has a large economic potential, but needs more support from local governments and external institutions such as NGOs to support a more equitable benefit distribution and to generate more favorable local perceptions. Locals need training in timber measurement, document administration, extraction balances, and cash flow to have better control of the activity and make more informed decisions. In addition, more support is needed to empower these communities for managing their own natural resources at a commercial scale and provide them with equipment they need for a commercial scale extraction, as the way it is currently done is not viable for them or the ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Sira Bihudi and welcome to my presentation titled Conservation Status Revision and Community Perception of 22 alloy species in Tanzania. Alloy species are found in mainland Africa in tropical and subtropical latitude, and most of these species can be found in highlands and some are found in lowlands like Alloy boscaweni. In Tanzania, we have 52 species, 24 of which are endemic, 12 are threatened, and 5 are critically endangered. Environmental factor and anthropogenic activities have been documented to be the main threat for the disappearance of these alloy species. Alloy species are locally endangered and is mainly due to human activities. And IUCN have assessed the availability of 54 alloy species in Tanzania, and the latest assessment was conducted in 2009 for the 18 alloy species in the eastern neck and coastal forest, and some of these species were categorized as data deficient, so we need to update the data deficient species, but also one of the species was recorded not to be seen in the world since 1954, which is Alloy boscaweni. So in this assessment, I based on the GeoCat. It's an online tool which perform rapidly geospatial analysis of species in a simple and powerful way. The aim of this study is to reassess the conservation status of 22 alloy species in Tanzania using the IUCN Rare List category and communities perception. Material method. Stratified meander survey was conducted to locate the alloy species that are randomly distributed, and a systematic search was done along the water bodies for the species that are found in water bodies. Assessment category followed the guidelines set by the IUCN, SSC, and local members of the community were used as field assistants to help in locating where the species are, but also to help with the interpretation from the locals. Those are the criteria that were used. We used criteria B, which is a geographical range, and it further categorized the species based on their extent of occurrence and area of occupants. So in our result, a total of 22 alloy species were evaluated for their conservation status, and 74% were perceived to be threatened. There was no significant correlation between the alloy species diversity and elevation, and most of these alloy species were found in rock area, water bodies. For the alloy species that were previously assessed, but they are non-endemic to Tanzania, in which we cannot compare with the previous IUCN Red List, most of them were perceived to be, they were categorized to be endangered, followed by those that were less concerned. And for the alloy species that are endemic to Tanzania, and can be compared with the IUCN Red List. All of them were categorized as threatened, and one was critical endangered, two were endangered, and one was vulnerable. And for the alloy species that were not previously assessed, they were all categorized as threatened, and most of these endemic and threatened species were found in Eastern Mountain and coastal forests of Tanzania, and most of these species were highly distributed in the Eastern and coastal forests, but also the Katavi-Rukwa ecosystem. And from our study, aloe barley in Kisiwani was perceived to be locally extinct by the member of the community. Aloe volcaceae in Kideleko was perceived to be locally extinct. Flexifolia was highly treated for making soap and other aloe products in Dar es Salaam and Kilimanjaro, and aloe subfundicola was highly traded in South. The main threats for these aloe is agricultural activities and fire, as you can see, and the wild. In my conclusion, Tanzania aloe species are declining, and it's mainly due to human activities, and most of these aloe species are found in both highland and lowland, and conservation status must be updated regularly because their status keep changing as the human population keep increasing. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Matt Hallett from the Department of Wildlife Ecology and Conservation at the University of Florida, the Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens, and the Rupununi Wildlife Research Unit. I'm thrilled to be here at ATBC 2021 to tell you a little bit more about our team's journey from grassroots research to informing wildlife policy in Guyana. First things first, a little housekeeping. We are talking about Guyana here, the westernmost of the three small countries clustered at the top of South America, but right at the heart of the Guyana Shield, one of the world's last frontier forests. Guyana itself is a high forest cover, low deforestation rate country, with estimates calculating as much as 85% of its total land area being covered by intact tropical forest. I'm lucky enough to work in the Rupununi region of southwestern Guyana, an amazingly diverse landscape, which includes intact neotropical savanna, seasonally flooded wetlands, lowland forests, montane forests, and the amazing indigenous Mukushi and Wapishan communities that call this region home and have served as the stewards of its natural resources for millennia. My work in the Rupununi region began more than a decade ago, first as a volunteer, then as a master's student, and here as a PhD student, where we conducted a region-wide assessment of jaguar populations, accounting for variations in use among major habitat types that you saw in the previous slide, as well as the camera trap photos there at the left. Of course, a research project of this scope and scale required a massive investment in capacity building among local research assistants. We tried to invest in skills that would not only benefit our project, but would also be transferable to other major employment sectors around the region. During this time, we trained more than 150 local research assistants from a variety of indigenous communities, private ranches, as well as protected areas, including the Iwakrama Forest and the Kanaku Mountains protected area. Of course, with all this research, training, and fieldwork, natural leaders began to emerge from the group. And we've done everything that we can to support and promote these leaders in increasing their level of participation in our work by creating opportunities to develop leadership skills, and as well as lead and train groups of their peers in our various research projects around the region. Our collaboration with the Protected Areas Commission on camera trap monitoring also led to a project where we worked together to assess the impact of current levels of hunting on key game species in and around the Kanaku Mountains protected area. The results from this study were interesting in and among themselves, in that current levels of hunting were relatively sustainable, and negative associations where hunting were only detected with large-bodied species and those preferred by hunters. But this project really gave our team an opportunity to spread their wings, so to speak, as they established a reputation for being skilled in assessing the impact of human activities, as well as collaborating with NGOs and government agencies by sharing information freely and inviting all stakeholders to participate freely as part of the research process. Working with the Protected Areas Commission led to an invitation by the Guyana Wildlife Conservation and Management Commission to be part of the Sustainable Wildlife Management Program in Guyana. This program has many different factors and facets, but the scale of the project really allowed our team to continue to learn and grow together. We've since formed a leadership team, of which I'm only one member, but works together to collaboratively determine the area of focus of our work, to identify important research questions, and select the projects that we pursue. We continue to invest in training and leadership development, and to establish evaluate the sustainable use of especially large mammals during this project, but we've been able to pursue other avenues and give opportunities for our people to continue to build new skills and get new challenges. Working together with the Wildlife Commission under the SWM project led to an invitation to be part of an additional project with the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, or ACTO, and the Iwokrama International Center. Under this project, our team has gone from creating conducting local and regional assessments to nationwide assessments of the population status, levels of use, consumption, and trade of a variety of species of conservation interest, including lowland tapir, 3 species of caimans, and 2 species of tortoises in Guyana. The output of this project will be to draft wildlife management plans, propose national harvest limits and seasons, and trade quotas for these species that will be considered and then implemented by the Wildlife Commission. These are the types of projects that wildlife biologists and conservationists dream about, and I think our work has proven that investing in people, in building capacity and providing leadership opportunities is key for working your way up the ladder and affecting change at local, regional, and national policy levels. Thank you for the opportunity to present. Feel free to follow our group on a variety of social media platforms, and I look forward to the rest of the talks this week.
I am a postdoc at the University of São Paulo in Brazil. In this study, we investigated how rural-urban mobility influences wild meat access and consumption in the Brazilian Amazonia. By rural-urban mobility, we mean the circulation of people and products between rural and urban areas, as well as households' economic strategies that depend on this circulation and people origin. So there's evidence of lower wild meat consumption per capita in urban areas compared to rural areas, not only in Amazonia, but also in Africa. But the population growth in those areas already challenged sustainable hunting in many regions. In Amazonia, urban consumption is generally attributed to commercial flows, although there is evidence of no-market flows as well. It's important to note that wild meat consumption in Brazil is generally illegal, and trade on wildlife is always illegal. So there is a growing urbanization in Amazonia, but that does not mean the abandonment of rural areas and livelihoods. So there's still much evidence of rural-urban mobility, and that may also mean flows of products outside of market exchanges. So we wanted to understand the conservation implications of urbanization and rural-urban mobility to wildlife, particularly to game species in central Brazil and Amazonia. So we investigated differences in the volume and patterns of wild meat consumption between urban and rural areas, and the association between rural-urban mobility and wild meat consumption. We sampled 4 municipalities unconnected by roads. We surveyed 800 urban households and more than 300 rural households in dozens of different riverine communities. We found that rural-urban mobility prevailed even in urban areas. So more than half of urban households were headed by rural immigrants, and they also maintain rural-type livelihoods. They mean fishing, agriculture, or the extraction of forest products, for example. We saw that rural-urban mobility shape wild meat consumption in urban areas, so that wild meat consumption frequency is higher among rural immigrants and those with rural livelihoods. Similar to other studies, rural consumption per capita is still much higher than urban consumption. So that's due to lower frequency and lower quantity consumed per meal in urban areas compared to rural areas. When we estimated total consumption for all 33 roadless towns in the same state, we found that rural consumption is still much higher, although around 60% of the population now live in urban areas. In urban areas, trade was very important, but also gift was very important. So people acquire wild meat through gifts as well. We saw that trade was positively associated with higher per capita income, so that richer households are more likely to purchase wild meat than poorer ones. And also households with rural livelihoods are less likely to purchase wild meat. So they depend mostly on gifts and on hunting directly. We saw that urban consumption was still very varied. They consume a lot of species, but the urban consumption was mainly concentrated in 3 species that did not happen for rural consumption. And 2 of these species, tapir and white-lipped peccary, are considerably vulnerable. We also saw that consumption was related to preferences. So these 3 species were more often consumed, and they were more often declared as preferred. So we saw that although trade is very important in urban areas, access to wild meat in towns is also mediated by social relations and rural-urban mobility. So if current illegality is enforced, this could impact immigrants that still hold strong connections to urban areas, and they happen to be the most vulnerable households. So they are multidimensionally poor, so that could enforce illegality, could impact their food security, for example. But we saw that monetary income mediates wild meat purchase. So maybe focusing on curbing trade instead of curbing all wild meat consumption could be enough to protect vulnerable species. But we also saw that overall consumption is still concentrated in rural areas, not in urban areas. So it's obviously much necessary to have sustainable hunting management. So to ensure equitable wild meat access to both rural population that depend on the most on wild meat, and also to vulnerable urban households. Thank you.
500 people and over 100 elephants die each year due to negative interactions between the 2 species in India. And these conflicts lead to the deterioration of the quality of life for both elephants as well as humans. Given these consequences, it is imperative to aid the 2 species to share spaces safely from both a wildlife conservation perspective as well as a social justice perspective. In order to do so, a host of methods are employed. And of these, the most widely used is the non-lethal power fence, which gives the elephant a shock but does not kill it, thus serving as a kind of a psychological deterrent for the elephants. This is what it looks like. However, in order for these fences to work, they need to be maintained. That is, people need to work together collectively to ensure that the fences work. This is exactly like a public good, where those that are beneficiaries to a system have to come together and agree on a set of norms, a set of rules, in order to reap the benefit of the good. And here, despite the perceived effectiveness of a fence in deterring elephants, only about 35% of the fences in the landscape are well maintained and functional. Now, this throws up a very counterintuitive question. Why are some fences well maintained while others are poorly maintained? While many have studied the effectiveness of these different deterrents, very few have looked at why they fail. To what degree is this because of ecological factors like elephant raiding patterns and sociological factors like governance systems? So to study this, to answer this, we studied 19 villages with fences in the northeast of India and used a range of ecological and qualitative research methods to understand why they worked or failed. And these methods were used in tandem to triangulate the causal mechanisms behind maintenance to yield an overarching theory. We used all of these methods. And to frame and design the study, we used grounded theory and Ostrom's socio-ecological systems framework to use to build and refine the hypotheses. And then we used a qualitative comparative analysis on our massive data set that comprised the following. Now, this resulted in a descriptive model of the same. And in the interest of time, I shall highlight the most relevant ones. We found that there are 3 pathways to maintenance. And these entities would undertake maintenance only if the perceived benefits outweighed the perceived costs for them. which were a mix of both material as well as sociological intangible factors. For instance, for a pre-decided designated community maintainer, the social reputation and goodwill gained from maintenance was a strong motivator in addition to the remuneration. And where we found that the community failed to self-organize due to something we call the sucker effect, which is where some people refuse to partake in maintenance, leading to others feeling that they were suckers for undertaking efforts from which everyone benefited, and thus they gave up maintenance altogether. Interestingly, we also found that the last entity, the forest department, maintained fences when they wanted to restrict elephants to a forest, largely because the presence and hence fear of the elephants would deter illegal activities such as poachers and illegal timber extraction, thus reducing the need for the forest department to patrol, in effect getting the elephants to do their job. To conclude, we feel that it is possible for people, these two highly intelligent beings, humans and elephants, to share spaces safely, as has been put very succinctly by the person here, by the lady here in the image. To conclude, in addition to providing a detailed plan when implementing fences, more broadly, we recommend that for such collective action problems to be solved, we need to preemptively involve all the community members, which creates a shared context and reduces the chances of non-compliance and sabotage, whether or not they eventually partake in the maintenance and monitoring activities or not. And even more broadly, in such complex and chaotic systems, a technical solution alone is not going to work. Both the ecological and sociological components need to be understood. That is, we need a descriptive understanding in order to provide prescriptive solutions. And such social ecological studies help fill in this gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. Speakers, feel free to turn your videos back on, and we can see, and we'll be able to hear from you when we have a question. So first, I'd like to say congratulations. Those were all great talks. So thanks. Thanks for that. All right. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and so I'll start with the first one, which was a question for Matthew and your colleagues, Matthew Pierre and your colleagues working in Madagascar, which is, could you tell us a little bit more about the participatory methods you used, such as the drawings, and how did the different stakeholders react to your different methods? And then you'll need to unmute.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, moderator. And thank you very much, Beatrice Demazi, for the question. First of all, about the participatory method we have used is like, we had two main different kind of participant. First of all, we have the expert, including researcher, NGO, conservation, state representative, and the mayor and the chief of the village coming, expressing their idea, giving their idea about the model, about the research question, about the situation, about the natural use of the forest. And also we have two local community living around the National Park of Ranmafana from two different ethnic and two different location of area. So we have integrated all their voice, and the model was made mainly because of their idea. So basically it is the idea that the idea of all the participants that we have integrated. About the drawings, we have used the drawings because most of local community were illiterated, and we didn't have another way to express, for example, all the actors, the resources, and etc. So the drawing was the best way to make the model, to make the link, to have a better understanding about the RD method. And also the reaction of stakeholders. First of all, they were surprised because they didn't expect that finally in the last workshop, the model was presented in the model and in a very full model representing all the workshop, all the 10 workshops we have done. So first of all, they were happy and surprised that the staff of Machi project have made this model, the simple model expressing the 10 workshops we have done. Yeah, and I will give the speech to Nirina, my colleague.
Thank you, Mathieu, and thank you, Sarah, moderator, and thank you, the Anonymous for the question. And just I would like to add that Mathieu said that we have 3 facilitators to make easy this study. So 2 facilitators is a master student from the 2 universities different. And the reason that why we choose this 2 facilitators is each one of them know the culture and the dialect in this 2 local community different. And the one last facilitator is a PhD student who facilitates the workshop with the local communities, with the experts, NGOs, state representing, and it makes easy the study. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. The next question is to Lucia. And the question is, can you give an example of the criteria or indicators that you are using for your evaluations?
Sure, thanks for the question. So first of all, the criteria and indicators are nested within each other. So a specific criterion, and I'll give a couple of examples, we'll have some indicators that correspond to that criteria. For example, one criterion that we use is local perception of forest management, and the corresponding indicators would be perception of change in forest conditions. So if it was better, worse, or the same. Another indicator for that same criterion was local satisfaction with timber harvest. So satisfied, yes, no, why? We had a lot of people who also didn't feel confident responding, so we had no responses there too sometimes. But at least it's trying to make a more concrete or objective way, try to put qualitative data in a yes, no, why, or different reasons. For example, another criterion was priority of timber extraction within economic activities. If timber was their first priority, second priority. So try to put a number or a more objective way into qualitative data. Let me try and look up another criterion here. For example, existence and compliance of forest management and land use plans. The indicators that would be nested in there would be the existence of updated annual operating plans. Was there a plan, yes or no, or how many? Another one would be the percentage of activities indicated in the annual operating plans, if they were completed or no. So basically try to make a spreadsheet and just trying to fill up numbers as much as we can. Of course, it's sometimes very hard to quantify these things, but just trying to put it as objective as we can to be able to work with qualitative data.
Great, thank you. And not necessarily following up on that question, but just talking about your study in general, what were the major timber products being harvested?
So our different timber species, there was a mahogany plantation that was not successful, which was sad. There were no follow-ups with the community, so the mahogany was not very productive. We had some trees that we call them Chihuahuaco in their local name. We have some Capirona, but all of them are for construction, for drawers, for flooring, some of the woods. The community itself will use them for their own houses. We'll use the palm trees to cover their roofs. We'll use canoes out of the wood. So it depends if we're talking about commercial products to sell to a company or to ship it up to a city or for the community themselves. But you'll see a lot of wood utensils, flooring in their houses, although the wood was, or the walls were made of wood too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thanks. All right, our next question is to Patricia. Based on your data, gifts account for more or less half of wild meat consumption, both in rural and urban areas. Is this related to immigration from rural to urban areas, or do urban populations keep the same habit or tradition?
So to make it clear, in the model, I use this variable of gift, trade, or hunting as a binary variable. So I put gifts together with hunting. So trade was 1, for example, and gifts together with hunting was 0. So what we found was actually immigrants and people that kept rural livelihoods, they were less likely to purchase, but I didn't separate gifts from hunting. So they are more likely to receive wild meat as a gift or to hunt wild meat themselves compared to people that were not immigrants. But yes, it does have a relationship with rural area because immigrants in the urban area consume wild meat more frequently than people that were not rural immigrants. And also the fact that they do receive more wild meat as gifts or they hunt themselves, that means that they actually have stronger connections with rural areas, which could be like stronger social links with people that either live in rural areas or have direct contact with rural areas. That could be relatives or friends. So we do see this connection from there, but in our model, we didn't separate gifts from hunting. So I can't say specifically related to gifts.
Okay, great. Thank you, Patricia. This question is for Matt. Regarding your project using both scientific and local knowledge, were there any divergences between both? If yes, how did you face them?
Trying to, any divergences between scientific and local knowledge. So I think we haven't had any sort of major disagreements between the two ways of knowing that we try to bring together in our work. I think where we don't always see things line up are the way that people interpret the information that we're seeing. So there are a lot of traditional beliefs that are maintained in the interior of Guyana about, you know, sort of more spiritual or metaphysical things that are driving animal movements, variations in population size or trends over time, and these kinds of things. But I think the wide acknowledgement is that the data are what the data are. So if we're doing camera trap work or you know, pitfall trapping for tortoises, right? What we're seeing is what we're seeing. I think where we diverge sometimes are the interpretation of why what we're seeing is occurring. And I may have one perspective, others may have another. And I think the way that we've coexisted over time or sort of continue to work together is that, you know, I don't think we place any, I try not to at least personally place any value judgments on what those interpretations are, or say what is right or wrong, or tell people that the way that I've learned is the right way, and this is what's happening. So I think we are within our team, we share information freely, sort of among ourselves, and discuss these things about what might be going. The questions are hard to answer because they're sort of big things that are outside of the scope of our research. So we sort of leave it at that. Everyone has their own way of interpreting and understanding the world. I come from a very different background, having been born and raised in Chicago, and now transported, spending most of my year in the jungle in Guyana. So I don't try to sort of pretend to understand the experiences of others. So we just share our experiences freely, and sort of leave it at that. Hope that answers your question.
Great, thanks, Matt. And actually, I was wondering about the leadership team that that you all are using. What, how do you go about making decisions with lots of different people? I mean, sort of a general question about how does a team work, but
sure, yeah, that's a good question. It's very informal. I'll be honest. I've tried to sort of, when we started talking about putting a team together and deciding on what types of projects we want to do, and we have people that are sort of capable of leading their own projects and taking on consulting work. So how do we sort of everybody stay on the same page when people are branching off and doing their own things? And so I tried sort of sitting everyone down and having a meeting and saying, this is what we're going to do, and this is the agenda. And like everyone clammed up and they didn't want to talk, and it was very formal and kind of stuffy, and nobody liked it. And so I think what we've tended to do over time is, one, I try to listen and take note of ideas that people might tell me, just sort of informally in conversation, and then look for times when we're kind of all together and we can bring those ideas up again and see if there's still interest there, if there's interest as a group. Is this something that we could pursue together? Do we need to look for money? How do we, sort of proceed in a more informal way? But I think, sometimes those conversations happen, at halftime of a football game when we're all sitting around and watching. Sometimes they happen when we're all traveling somewhere in a vehicle or a boat, and the moment comes up to sort of discuss those things. I think we try to watch out for those opportunities and string together things, but the solution sort of has not been to bring everyone together and say, this is the meeting time now, and here's the agenda, and here's how we discuss. And instead we sort of do it more informally over time. We also have the leadership team itself. We have people that, everybody comes and goes. I can't employ anyone full time, and actually nobody in the interior of Guyana would probably accept a full-time job because it's sort of not how the lifestyle goes. So we do have people, they leave, they pursue work elsewhere, they get a job doing something else, they leave the leadership team, someone else comes in. We have a new project, we might have somebody come in just for the project and they sort of drift off. So even the team itself is a little bit more nebulous. We have a few core members who have been there, for more than 10 years now, and are sort of stick with it because they're some of my best friends, and maybe they're just loyal and like sticking around me. But so the whole thing is a little bit nebulous, and we sort of treat it like a family or a bunch of friends, right? We come together, we discuss issues when the opportunities presents itself, we make decisions. If we have a deadline or something, of course, we need to sort of get consensus. I use WhatsApp for those things a lot of times, and people just vote and say yes or no. But yeah, we've strayed away from the formal meeting agenda type of thing, and that's been sort of better for us all.
Sounds good. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A, and our panelists or speakers feel free to put your questions to others into the chat. Arjun, while we're talking about leadership and discussions, maybe you could talk a little bit or answer a question about ways to reduce the sucker effect. I love that term, by the way, which I mean, it's not a good thing, obviously, but how do you, it seems easy to say, to get everybody's input ahead of time. It seems more difficult to do in practice.
Absolutely. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges in terms of scale that we're facing with our interventions, and these are millions of dollars being spent on these things and for some of the most marginalized people on the planet. So it really underscores the need to figure this out. And I think there are three levels at which we are trying to solve the sucker effect. And and surprisingly, it's with one intervention here, which is we just say that, and we're piloting this out now, and we've got some good results in that sense, which is we just say we try to take everyone's consensus in the village while the public good is being implemented, whether it's these fences or a version of the fences, which is a trench, which again requires similar work in sense of community coming together to maintain it. Now, this is the most interesting part, which is very counterintuitive for most of us, which is we would think that of course it's very difficult to get the entire community together and have a consensus. Some of them are villages of about 200 households, 300 households, but simply the act of coming together and having that option of coming together allows for people to have this shared context, because people cannot act as though they were not in the know. So so it might sound a little convoluted, but now the people that used to not comply or intentionally sabotage the fence just to save a couple of minutes, rather than going all the way around just to save a couple of minutes and sabotage the fence, or in some cases steal the posts on which the fence is standing, which is made of bamboo, which can be used as firewood. A marginal amount of wood will barely boil a pan of water, but it's just, it's very interesting. So just to say that if people are all together, then the people that are these sabotagers now know that the others know that they know. So it's a little convoluted, but now they have this shared idea that we shouldn't sabotage this, because all the others know in the community that we know the benefits of this thing and that we'll be hauled up. So just that, preemptive thing, it's a very small step to give people the option to come together, but that seems to be working phenomenally well. And whether or not people partake is not of consequence. They may choose to drop out, but at least they had the option to be involved also in designing the fence, such as where the gate should be, how long it should be, at what height it should be, and the like.
Great. Thank you very much. Maisa, I had a question for you about it. I thought it was really interesting that we just don't know very much about the effects of dams on anything other than than biodiversity or the ecological effects. But I wasn't quite sure. So what are your next steps with this research?
Yes. So our next steps, I said it briefly, but I wasn't very clear. We are trying to give a response direction for each study, whether if their findings were positive or negative or neutral. And at the same time, we are also trying to extract some quantitative data, and we aim to conduct a meta-analysis so we can have an overall response of the effects of dams. And we want to connect all these dimensions, both ecological, social, and economic. I don't know if I answered your question.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. But just using the networks, or using the studies that have already been conducted, or conducting new ones?
Yes, no, the studies that comprise our data set, the 145 studies that we found.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Wonderful. Does anybody else have any questions for our speakers? All right. Well, why don't we, we're getting close to the end of the time, and I think that we have, let's see. We do have one more question that just came up. let's see. So for Matthew in Madagascar and your team, did you have any inconveniences when using facilitators? When I used a local to help the same way you did, I had a problem that the facilitator would put his own opinion into the interviewee's response instead of literally translating what he should.
Okay, first of all, we were a team. This project, it was a part of researcher from Helsinki, Marketa and Ena. They are PhD doctors, so they have hired us as assistant and researcher, and with the facilitator, we were a team that worked closely and make a rehearsal about the workshop that we have done with the facilitator. So the inconvenience, there have been no big inconvenience or pre-settled judgment from the facilitator because the facilitator, they didn't work alone, but we were there as an assistant. We supervise what the facilitator has done, and so that I think our cohesion in the group and us as a research assistant and the PhD, our force together make that there was no incidents or inconvenience coming during the workshop. So I think there was no inconvenience coming. I don't know what you can say.
Yeah.
I don't know if it is.
Thanks, Matthew, for the answer. I was just wondering because, say, I don't know if my question was easy to understand, but when I used a local for that, the response, the person who I was interviewing had said like 2 lines, and the facilitator, interpreter would say a whole paragraph. So I knew there were some things that he was putting from his own opinion. I'm glad you worked as a team and it didn't happen to you. So this is something to be aware of, I guess. Or
yeah, and also Lisha, you are right, but we didn't hire the facilitator from the community in which we are doing the workshop. So we have hired another facilitator from who is a stranger in the community, but they knew the dialect, the culture. So our advantage was that the facilitator, they didn't have their own opinion because they are not living in the community itself, but from another. So they are new to the situation there, but they know the dialect and the culture.
that's good advice.
Lisa, just I want to add a little for the all the participants, all of the team of the MATSI project. We are here. We are know more about the culture and the much part of the livelihood of local community around Ranmafan National Park.
And also I would like to add that during the workshop, we have asked the consentment of the participant to record the workshop. So we have recorded with a voice recorded. So after the workshop, we had made a transcription about what said the facilitator, what said the participant, the local community, So of course, there was a consentment of the participant before recording the video. So like this, there was no misinterpretation or something like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for the question and for the answers and the discussion. All right, so I'd like to thank all the speakers again. Great job with your talks, doing really interesting research. And thank you to Javi Rudolph for helping us with the Zoom today. Thank you to the audience for participating and for asking questions. So I hope you all can attend the social activities that are happening in a few minutes here, and see you tomorrow, if not. All right. Bye all.